Every day, their puppets are eliminated. Ask Muhammad Def. Ask Nasrallah. There is nowhere in the Middle East Israel cannot reach. There's nowhere we will not go to protect our people and protect our country. With every passing moment, the regime is bringing you, the noble Persian people, closer to the abyss. But you know one simple thing. Iran's tyrants don't care about your future, but you do. When Iran is finally free, and that moment will come a lot sooner than people think, everything will be different.
Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. My name is Andy Libson, and I'm joined by Kenny Zepeda. We are online at what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find the link to our blog in the episode notes. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, share your favorite episode, and jot down our information wherever you found this episode. Today is a special episode for a few reasons. Number one, we're recording this like on a Tuesday. Normally we record on a Thursday. And in fact, Kenny, you had suggested maybe wait a day because folks, we're going to be talking about what's been going on in the Middle East. You know that probably from the thumbnail. But as Kenny's rightly saying, you know, like maybe if we wait a little longer, we'll just see how more events play out. But number one, I'm leaving for Albuquerque on Thursday to go see the balloons with Brandy on her birthday. Her birthday is October 3rd. And number two, I think events are unfolding perfectly fine, not perfectly fine, but perfectly clearly to me. And I'd like to just have you and me, Kenny, you know, put out what we see about what's going on days before maybe things are more clear. Although, in my opinion, we are just at the beginning of things, not nearly at the end of them. So that's the idea. We're talking about what's going on with Israel, Lebanon, Iran. I believe we're talking about Ukraine. I believe we're talking about obviously the United States. I believe we're talking about the world here. So I think we'll get started. Any comments before I?
No, just to say that you reached out on Sunday night or Sunday, to talk about this, and a lot has happened since Sunday till today, and so there's a lot to talk about and interpret, I guess, or make sense of.
Yeah. So and I guess just to lay it out, some of the events that I want to try to make sense of are exploding pagers in Lebanon, exploding electronics in Lebanon, assassinations in Lebanon, Israeli soldiers entering into Lebanon, Iran sending missiles into Israel, Putin talking about changing the nuclear posture in relationship to the West, what's going on in Ukraine. And I'll probably also spend a little bit of time talking about the U.S. posture and plan in China for how it's going to keep it down. I want to start though. Oh, go ahead.
But there's also the U.S. has also made changes to its nuclear plans, right?
Yes. That could be talked about too, correct. And in 2 or 3 weeks, there's going to be a BRICS summit in Russia, which...
And it's just important because we've been wanting to talk about this nuclear change of postures by both Russia and the United States, right? And then now we have these events that tie up to this. Some people might see as disconnected, but I think we'll make an argument to the opposite.
Yeah, so I think we're just going to help each other. Looks like on this episode, I don't know if we're going to have much area of disagreement. We'll see. But I think we're going to help each other construct a large picture of what we see is happening. So if I see you leaving something out or you see me leaving something out, we'll just go to those areas. So I want to start actually with a clip from Berletic. He goes by the New Atlas, and I've talked about him before. And it's something he talked about in an episode. He wrote an article saying the U.S. war on China is a war on the world. And he says something very interesting in the beginning of this YouTube video in which he's talking about the article. Kenny, have you seen this YouTube video? Okay, all right. And I really agree with it, and I want to use it to frame what we're going to talk about.
Many people who follow geopolitics have their areas of interest. People are sometimes so overly obsessed with a particular conflict anywhere on the globe, to the point where they do not zoom out and see how it fits into the rest of what's happening around the world. They don't understand that it's just one small part of a much wider struggle. Sometimes they believe that the conflict that they're obsessed with is the only struggle, the only primary struggle, and everything else is just at its periphery or just coincidentally unfolding as well. Somehow in their minds they isolate it all, but in reality all of this is connected. Every conflict, every major conflict around the globe is part of a singular, long-standing, long-running U.S. foreign policy objective, what many people call the Wolfowitz doctrine, but what is essentially modern-day imperialism. The U.S. wants to maintain American primacy over the entire planet by identifying, undermining, and eliminating all potential or existing peer or near-peer competitors. That is a reality. This is something that has been admitted for decades, since the end of the Cold War, and it is something the U.S. has been openly pursuing all around the world, whether it's conflicts across the Middle East, the ongoing proxy war against Russia and Ukraine, and the escalating tensions we see here in the Asia Pacific, where I am based.
You want to say anything about what Berletic is saying?
I can, if you, but you wanted to. Okay.
Well, I think because I'm going to go on, so I would say go ahead.
I'll take the mic.
Yeah.
I mean, I completely agree. That's how I see the world. Things don't happen in isolation. At the beginning of this episode, we talked about a bunch of things that are connected, right? And we can even throw more things in there, right? Like there are things happening around India, for example, governments that are being toppled near India, putting pressure on India. And that also ties to this, to what's happening in the world in this attempt to take more of a power share from the U.S., right? The hegemon at the moment. So yes, I mean, I think that is very accurate in order to understand the big players make big moves and things happen, and that's how I see it. So I completely agree. I don't think anything is isolated. I don't think, for example, what's happening in Venezuela is isolated from this. And maybe it's hard to make an accurate assessment sometimes until shit happens. Just like things like the events that have transcurred the last 3 days, right? So last night, Monday, Sunday, and today, being Tuesday. Today is like the 1st of October. Yeah. So yes, nothing is disconnected in my view. And I guess the other thing that maybe you'll get into is that I think it's a mistake to read these things in moral terms, in the way that it's sold to us in the media. There are big games. There are games of power and domination. There is very little room for morality for the players that are making these choices. And so I don't think that we can analyze effectively anything that is happening in the world. Any conflict where people are getting shitted on, or immigration is also all connected. It's connected in so many profound ways. And so I'm glad that you shared that video, because I 1000% agree with it.
Yeah. And so I guess what I want to say in terms of trying to understand what's taking place and to try to get a sense of where this is leading is, back in June, we had an episode where I said, and I think you agreed, Kenny, World War III has started. So that's what we are seeing, folks, in my opinion. It's not a neocon war. It's not Netanyahu's war. It's not AIPAC's war. We are seeing the ever expanding whirlpool of the vortex of World War III. And World War III is a capitalist war. It is a war for profits. It is a war in the context of falling profits. It is a war in the context of diminishing resources in relationship to the expanding needs of production. Production must always exponentially grow, even if there aren't markets there to take it up. That's just the nature of capitalism. And so in order to expand your production, you must expand your resource acquisition. And so China and Russia and the United States and the West all find themselves in this scramble. The US and the West on one side, Russia and China on the other. We know that there's other players. Again, in India will come. India's coming in, and India largely looks like it's going to be coming in on the side of the non-West, if you will. But what we are watching is the beginning of the growing expansion of World War III, pulling ever greater sections of it into the war. So people who have said, "Oh, Netanyahu is drawing U.S. into this war," are completely wrong. In my opinion, are completely wrong. The U.S. signed on to everything that Israel has done in these last few days. Signed on to the pagers blowing up. Signed on to the killing Nasrallah, lying to Nasrallah. The U.S. played a role in lying to Nasrallah about here's some peace things, lying to Iran about here's some peace possibilities, just like they lied to Russia around aspects of Ukraine, and they've done so with the aim of assisting Israel in getting the jump on its opponents in the Middle East. And I believe it has everything to do with the war in Ukraine, because the U.S. is losing its war in Ukraine. U.S. is very much challenged in what's happening in the South Pacific. U.S. and the West are losing their grip on Africa, actually, and even in some ways being challenged in South America. And the one place that the U.S. has an advantage militarily right now is the fact that it is allied with Israel. And if it acts now, I believe it thinks that it can take a major player, Iran, off the board. And Iran is China and Russia's Israel in that region. Iran is not a play. Iran is a proxy, just like Israel is a proxy. Proxies of bigger powers. And right now, we are seeing through the proxies these forces fighting each other. Because it's not just proxies fighting. The U.S. has been playing a direct role in attacking Russia. Right, and they're asking to sign on to even greater part of that when they talk about going into being allowed to use long range missiles. That everyone knows the U.S. will be direct. The U.S. will use its satellites to direct them. The U.S. likely will not just be supplying the munitions, but supplying the technicians to develop and target with those things. So you're literally talking about U.S. soldiers using U.S. weapons and U.S. Stuff to attack Russia. Similarly, in the case of Iran and Israel, only a few months ago, U.S. played a direct role in trying to defend Israel with its own fighter jets against an attack. Similar thing happened here today, where the bombs that Iran sent, which many of them got through that Iron Dome, unlike the last one, U.S. had ships in the region that were trying to shoot those things down. And from my understanding, the targets that for Iran were airstrips to shoot at F-35s, and I also heard a Mossad section got hit and things like that. So those were supposedly the targets, and I've been told, at least this is what Iran is reporting, that they've been hit. U.S. is reporting, that we blocked everything, nothing got through. I mean, you can just see this. You can see the images. Shit's getting through, and things getting exploded. It is not things getting knocked off course, So, but I think the U.S. and we'll see how Israel talks about it. But this, so this is not Netanyahu's war. This is not, and it's not a neocon war. That's the other thing I was going to say. People sometimes think this is a neocon war. There's a neocon strategy for fighting this war, which is, we think they want to fight three wars at one time. They want to go after Russia, they want to go in the Middle East, and they want to go directly after China. That's true. But the U.S. ruling class is united in an imperial war, even if they're not convinced about whether or not they have to fight this war with Ukraine. There is a section of the U.S. ruling class that would say, let's draw down our shit in Ukraine and let's redirect towards China. And certainly, we're going to say central in defending Israel. People wonder sometimes, why is it we have Trump on one side and Kamala Harris on the other side, basically saying exactly the same policy as it relates to Israel, as it relates to China. Maybe you might hear slight differences with regards to Ukraine. And that's because since these are imperial wars, since these are capitalist wars, they are not decided by policy. They are decided by the interests of capital. And the interest of it's not about Kamala Harris or Donald Trump being dumb or being smart. They are puppets in the first place. But behind them are interests that understand that US capital is in decline in relationship to its competitors. And so it must change the game quickly, I would say, because time is not on the US side. That's one thing to understand. Time in terms of production, times in terms of its economy, times in terms of its military, times in terms of its allies in Europe are all seem against the United States. And this is why it's necessary for the US to strike fast and strike hard where it can. It can't in Ukraine because it's losing. It can't in the South, in Southeast Pacific, because it's not ready and it's not deployed properly, although it has a plan there that Brian Berletic lays out. But I think it can do so right now, where at this point with Israel. And so this is not madness, even though it seems like madness. This is not insanity. This is literally the best play a U.S. ruling class that is planning to win can make right now. And so I guess let's see. I guess I'll leave it at that, and see what you want to say from there.
Yeah, so I think, we both listen to people, right, that make analysis on what's happening. Let's talk about Israel, right? Like, one of the things that's been portrayed and that connects back to our home turf, the U.S., right, is that, right, Netanyahu and the Israeli lobby, right? This is one of the constant talks that they argue that Israel has captured the American political system, and that American politicians are making bad policies or like reckless policies, because of this Israeli money influencing America, right? Like that is the argument. And so, in order to recapture, George Napolitano, Scott Ritter, I think Garland Nixon to a good degree, some people that I listen to often, and others. And so this is a constant argument that completely negates, right, what we're saying, that it is about capital, it's about markets, it's about domination, it's about power projection, it's about the destruction of the overproduction of this system, right? Because we've talked about the diminishing profits, greater profits, and so on and so on, and so again, this idea that Netanyahu is just this rogue, crazy guy that is doing crazy things, like attacking Lebanon for no reason, like attacking, Iran for no reason, bombing an embassy in Syria, right?
And people are saying, oh, he's trying to draw the U.S. in, like he's trying to draw the U.S. into that.
Yeah, exactly. So the U.S. is just a passive player in the background. No, like you said earlier, Israel is an extension of the U.S. military. That's how I see it. They, like you were saying, they need a stamp of approval to do certain things, like going after the leader of Hezbollah, right? And dropping, what is this, 16,000 pounds? So I don't know, a great number.
It was 800-pound bombs, because they were trying to bust through a bunker. So they just, leveled some apartments. Then they have to drop bombs on the stuff to knock things aside. They have to drop bombs on the same thing to try to get down deeper. So it's just like bomb, bomb, bomb. It was, awful.
Yeah, exactly. And who's helping with, Israel is being using up. It's like what is it called, the Iron Dome, because Hezbollah has been shooting shit in, the Houthis have been shooting shit in, And these things are not cheap. This is something that I think Scott really gets right, that that the way the so-called axis of resistance that they call it is fighting Israel. Financially, it doesn't make sense for Israel and the West. It is a very disproportional advantage to the axis of resistance, and so on. So Israel, my point being is that Israel cannot do what it's doing without the direct support of America through intelligence, financial help, tactical, all this shit. And to say that Israel has influence on America, and it plays a role in the narrative that is sold to people. But that's not the case. Again, Israel is a proxy of the U.S. And even all those speeches that Netanyahu has been given, like you have to analyze or think about who he is talking to, because they're ridiculous, right? Like he talked at the UN. Whatever. The point is that I agree with you. You get nothing by assuming that Israel has a hold on the U.S. and that what we need to do is recapture this political system, and vote this coming November for the person that is going to get you the best, worst deal, out of the two. And like I said, there is none. And not only that, but policy, like you said, public policy, the policy that is presented to the people is not really what's going on. What really drives the actions, the military actions, is the need that is created by capitalism, and that's what we're seeing today. That culmination, right, of these capitalist forces clashing against each other. Because we're not saying that Iran is like the good guy here, or that Russia is the good guy. They're all mobsters, right? And they're all fighting for their share. And I think that the people that are challenging the U.S. see an opening. And they also have to believe that they have to win, because they are taking some actions to challenge the U.S. Right? That the thing that happened on October 7th in Gaza, right? Like that wasn't an accident, right? That was kind of the what ignited all these things that are happening today. And again, that was a very well executed operation that caught Israel by surprise, right? But that was what some people call the axis of resistance, the good guys. And I don't take that position. I just see what is playing out, and who has to do what in order to win the game. And and I think there's other elements in terms of the nature of war, right? Like we're not seeing mass mobilization of American soldiers to the area, right? Like the nature of war now is like throwing missiles, throwing drones, and I don't know, like if that's going to change, and I don't see that.
The several thousand soldiers have already been mobilized to be sent to the Middle East, to be sent into that region. Several thousand U.S. soldiers. So that's still smallish, but yes, there are personnel being mobilized. I think people are thinking they're fighter pilots and the support for the fighter pilots and things like that. One thing I want to point out is that, which I don't think I did last time I was speaking, was how this is connected to Ukraine, and how it's connected to the U.S. strategy to change its fortunes in Ukraine. One thing you'll hear from people who we follow around the Ukraine war, and who understand that the Ukraine war is a proxy war, not an actual Ukraine fight for liberation, you will hear them say, this war is coming to an end. The Ukraine war is coming to an end. And they say that because, rightfully so, Russia is getting stronger and stronger. And the Ukrainian side, the people who are fighting on that front, whether it's being in Donetsk and even in the new opening area that in the Kursk region, are finding themselves, kind of receding and getting beaten down. The Kursk incursion was seen as a way of drawing resources of Russia's away from the Donetsk front, but that has been advancing. I think one of the reasons the U.S. is making this play right now, and it is a U.S. play that's being led, but that's being initiated or being executed by Israel, is the minute this happened, Russia sent, like they had already been sending people, like Shoigu went a few weeks ago, maybe almost a month ago, he went and visited Iran. Shoigu was like a head of defense in Russia. And then recently, I think a Russian prime minister or something like that went to Iran as a result of all these things that were going on with Hezbollah and things like that. Russia is directly involved in both supplying Iran and being supplied by Iran. And if Iran gets involved in a conflict, which I think the US wants Iran to get involved in the conflict, it is going to take resources away from Iran being able to send anything Russia's way. And it will also, Russia will have to defend Iran as best it can because it cannot allow its proxy in the region to fail. And so I actually think this is one of the ways that the US is going to take pressure off of the front in Ukraine is to actually force Russia to pay more attention here. It's been very interesting how silent China has been during this whole thing. I do know that China has actual direct economic connections to Iran, so no way China is going to let Iran fail either. But they have not. They've been less active or apparent in terms of going to Iran to help them. But I definitely know that China will be helping Iran as well in a war that is coming and will involve Iran, Israel, and the United States. So the U.S. will be going to war in the Middle East in the coming weeks or months. That, for me, that's undeniable because none of these wars are coming to a close. All of these wars are expanding, including the Ukrainian war. Only recently, Macron came out again and really doubled down on saying we are going to need to send troops. We cannot take sending troops into the Ukraine off the table. Poland has been talking about sending soldiers into Western Ukraine if Russia advances too far, and Russia seems to be continuing to advance. So again, anyone who's saying that the Ukraine war is going to end soon, or that Ukraine is going to sue for peace, the Ukraine is going to surrender, is wrong. Like that's not and the reason they're wrong is because this is not a war between Ukraine and Russia, just like it's not a war between Israel and Iran. We are in World War III. This is a war between the United States in the West and Russia and China. And just like World War II, the only way World War II can end with short of a revolution in one of those countries is one of the sides surrendering. People have to understand that. The only way this war ends, and it will expand to this, is when either the US or the West surrenders, like in the way that you saw Germany surrender, or when Russia or China surrenders. That's the only way this ends. And again, you have to remember that these powers that are, quote, surrendering all have nuclear weapons. So you have to ask yourself, what does surrender look like? And that's why, again, that's why for me, people have to understand we have to, unless this goes the World War I way, in which a revolution will take your government out of the war, which is what happened in Russia. They had a revolution and they took their government out of the war. The government kept on promising we're getting out of the war, and they kept on escalating instead of getting out of it. And finally, there was a revolution to take them out of the war. Unless that happens in one of these major countries, the United States, the West, Russia, or China, and of course, unless when that revolution happens, it must expand to those countries, we are going to see nuclear weapons used as a way of resolving this conflict. And that's why the recent statements that Putin has made, when he's basically saying, if you give them, well, he's not even saying if, because the long-range weapons are already being discussed in the way they were being discussed with Ukraine, he's already just saying, look, it is now Russia's policy that if a non-nuclear power exercises nuclear or non-nuclear threat to this country, then we reserve the right to use nuclear weapons to defend ourselves. And people have to understand that isn't just, in my opinion, that's not just a policy in relationship to Ukraine. That is now a policy in relationship to Russia helping Iran fight Israel and fight the United States. Because I believe that Russia and I believe China are not going to let Iran go down in a nuclear fireball without saying the same thing is going to happen to Israel. And that is my belief, at least, in terms of what is implied in that policy. So because because Netanyahu is talking very confidently, and there's a clip I'll play in the very beginning of this episode, which you'll have heard. He was speaking to the Iranian people, basically saying, the Iranian tyrants are holding you hostage and making us do what we're doing. I will be, he's especially saying, I'm going to be coming to your defense pretty soon. All this shit's going to get cleared up pretty soon. So clearly they think they've got something in their pocket to liberate the Iranian people. More likely than not, that means they are talking like another one of those decapitations that they've done in Lebanon, because they didn't just blow up or kill Nasrallah; they killed a whole layer of the Hezbollah leadership. So something like that may be in the cards, and Israel may be saying that they're going to do that, and that's definitely something that I think they're going to be trying, at least in the coming days. But all those things ratchet up the tensions and ratchet up the probability and the inevitability that these things lead towards the use of nuclear weapons.
I don't know if so. I have, I guess, a question. So up to today, right, when Iran started sending 200 missiles, they said, right, at least Western media. I don't know, the official, like the actual damage and the actual number. I don't know that, but the fact is that we know that Iran sent missiles to Israel, and prior to this, Israel had engaged in a series of escalatory actions, right, where they were bombing, consulates. They also did the pager and radio thing where, like 3,000 people got hurt and a bunch of people died, including some kids, right? And which was an operation that required a lot of planning, actually years of planning. In isolation, right, that event seemed like, because I remember Scott Reeder saying this is a desperate move by Israel. They use their, they use an operation that they were going to need for, an actual event, which is what they're doing right now. Because that, my understanding is that this pager radio thing caused a lot of chaos, right, in the communications within the Hezbollah, organization. It must have, it was, they didn't see the shit coming. Like, it was very efficient. And now we have this, right? Israel is taking action into Lebanon, even though, like, it's talked about as being in the perimeter right now.
Yeah.
My point is this, my question is, what do you make of Iran's, kind of public restraints? And same with Russia, because this has been the same thing in Russia, right? Like to a degree, at least from my vantage point, that Ukraine has been pushing that line, right, that red line, and they've been patient, right? At least that's an argument to be made. Like, what do you make of this? And why are they being restraining? Why are they restraining themselves?
Well, first off, that I believe Russia and China have been encouraging Iran to just not get involved, and it's been at a cost for Iran locally, for them to be being seen as weak. And the reason I believe that's the case is because time is on the other side. Like, not the West and the United States must get something done now. Their economic future, in my opinion, their production future, their economic future is waning in the face of a rising future of the BRICS powers and the BRICS forces. And the dollar is going to be in trouble in the coming years. And so China and Russia know that if they can just delay the conflict, then their situation for fighting the West and defeating the West only improves and only gets better. Their production is expanding. The other ones are just trying to catch up, and they're watching Europe collapse. Europe collapse economically, collapse politically with all these divisions and elections that are, and they are like saying, look, we can just these people are going to flame out. We won't even have to fight them. And the United States is saying, we have to fight them now because we're going to run a fight. And so I think what is happening is Iran is having to consult Russia and consult China on whatever it's doing. And basically at this point, I think they have allowed Iran to go forward and make a targeted shot, but Israel is going to do something hard coming back. So Iran will get drawn into this war. There's no way around it, and I don't think Russia and China can stop it. And so the U.S.'s best play is to get war happening now, like expand the war now, throw gasoline on that fire now, because if things go slow like this, the U.S. loses in the long run, and the final play that the U.S. is going to make, in my opinion, becomes a harder play to make. This is where we get into that article that I showed you from Ted Postal. Maybe I'll do a screen share on it. Let's see. Hold on. So I will put this article in the description of this episode. It's been responsible statecraft, Biden's new nuclear strategy, and the superfuse that sets it off. So what this describes is it's a technological development in the I'll just show the one figure that goes with it. It's a technological development in the U.S. nuclear arsenal that they're going to upgrade a bunch of their ICBMs and a bunch of their missiles with essentially the ability to do much higher precision nuclear bombing. This figure over here on the left shows what their old strategy for essentially knocking out your opponent's nuclear weapons before they can fire them. And they knew that they were just going to have to spread them all across the board, and they couldn't concentrate their fire in the way that they've done to kill Nasrallah. Think about it that way. Like they had to concentrate those bombs in the same area in order to go deeper and deeper. And now with this new technology, they are able to focus their nuclear weapons in areas kind of like this. This is detonation distribution from the superfuse, which means that the chance of actually well, here's the point. The chance of a first strike actually knocking out the entire mechanism of your opponent's nuclear arsenal is much higher now. And so this is what, and people have to understand, this technology is first strike technology. This means that the United States is looking to create a situation where it can justify in some way, shape, or form, not on the basis of surrender, but on the basis of the ever-growing aggressiveness of its opponents. If they can force their opponent to get aggressive enough to justify essentially a first strike, this is the U.S. plan. This is how the U.S. is going to win the war, which is first strike Russia, first strike China, destroy the vast majority of its nuclear arsenal they can get to. It's going to have a plan with regards to the nuclear subs of Russia, which at this point I haven't heard of any plan, but they better, because that Poseidon plan that Russia has, which is like a dead hand on nuclear weapons, essentially means the complete destruction of the entire East Coast. And so I don't know what happens there, but again, maybe the United States is going to plan on recentering itself in the center. But I don't know what to tell you, folks, but this is where they're going. And this is where this is leading. And the U.S. knows that it will be defeated in the long run. I believe that. So it must force this conflict to accelerate in the short term to then lead to a strategy that in the short run, they think they can win. And I think their winning strategy, because they know that if they're truly defeating their opponents in the short term, then their opponents are going to have to launch. Whether that be China or Russia. So one way or another, the U.S. knows that it has to take those powers out for good. And today that means nuclear weapons. And this, in my opinion, is why we're moving faster towards this, is because that's the only time frame that works for the United States and has them coming out on top.
Yeah. And again, this is a different scenario than the Cold War, right? There's more players with big toys, and also the U.S. is not on the ascent. It's being challenged seriously, and not just by one, but by multiple, and in a coalition of countries, and that have a great number of people. The majority of the world,
Right.
and I think that the technology has changed that equation, right? Very much. Yeah, sorry, it's just very, very gloomy, but I mean, we've talked about it, like extensively on the show, and maybe not so much in detail, but this is a winner take all. There's no sharing in this game. Um, there's no sharing in capitalism. You have to. There is no multipolar world that will stay in balance.
Yeah.
In again, when we consider the technological capacity of destruction that exists today, and this is where I think that I don't what I was referencing earlier, that I don't see so much a scenario of like the World War I or World War II, in the sense of masses of people battling each other. The shit that is happening in Ukraine right now, right? Like the insane number of casualties of forces clashing with each other, and like in like the what do you call the Romans, like pushing against each other. Uh, it's about hurling shit, and it's about taking out the capacity of someone else to destroy you. In that equation, also taking into account that you will lose some shit, right? You've mentioned that this nuclear strategy is not about not getting dented. It's about surviving the when the dust settles of everyone hurling shit. Because again, you just mentioned the U.S. Changing its posture when it comes to uh, initiating a preemptive strike. And what does that do, right? This is something Scott really talks a lot about. What this does is puts China, Russia, and anyone else with a nuclear weapon on alert. And now they have to escalate. They have to ready their systems to essentially, this is what I've heard Scott really talk about. Respond on launch. So as soon as they feel that the US has launched some shit, they have to unload all their fucking weapons. That you cannot leave anything behind, because then you lose the game. And that's the scary aspect of it. And again, I've heard Scott Ritter. I like his strategic and analysis. That's his expertise, whatever. But he's talked about like the world getting destroyed in like 75 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, it's true. One thing I will say is, I do believe prior to that full-out nuclear war, we are going to see more conflicts that look like Ukraine on the front lines. And it is interesting that you brought up Rome or Roman gladiators, because I saw an interesting analysis by either Weeb Union or I think it was Weeb Union, basically saying why Russia is being successful and why Ukraine is losing on these fronts, which was that Russia has mobilized enough of its forces so that it doesn't just have soldiers on the point of contact. It has reserves, layers of reserves right behind, so they can do rotations. You're fighting for a month and you rotate, not off the front line, you're still up near the front line, but you're rotated in the back and the next forces come up. And this is what Russia is doing over and over and over again. Whereas Ukraine, particularly because they've done the Kursk incursion, they don't have any rotatable forces. It's just the same people fighting day in and day out, day in and day out. And so this has been, Russia's been very successful using this method, and it's actually a method used by the Romans to fight the hordes at times. What we'll call the hordes, barbarians or whatever, I don't know. But I believe we're going to see more front lines like this. I think that's what Lebanon's going to look like. I believe Iran and Israel are not going to be able to be contained to just lobbing missiles at each other. There are going to be the attempts at penetrating countries with tanks and forces and soldiers, because in order to defeat your enemy, you have to take their territories over. You can't just do that with jets, and you can't do that with missiles. So, like I said, I think we're just at the beginning. I think the nature of what war will look like what's happening um, in Russia and the Ukraine. I do believe that then that's going to extend, that's going to expand, um, and I suspect China, like the United States in its time, is just going to play the game of staying out as long as possible. We'll just supply. We'll just supply, 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 supply. We're not involved in this. We're just supplying, and the U.S. is going to have to find a way to draw you to China in. Their strategy that Brian Berletic talks about in another article I'll post is they know they can't take them on immediately right now. So, and they can't even take them on in the sea right near them. So essentially, what the U.S. plan is to essentially strangle China's trade away from China. So that means Marines using surface to sea missiles, to like shoot down, to sink Chinese trade vessels kind of near their area, or when they're going through the Strait of Hormuz or any sort of place, essentially attacking them or commandeering their ships and basically repurposing them for U.S. trips, because U.S. Navy and U.S. Shipbuilding is behind China. So these are the plans that the U.S. has, which is we can't directly confront China, so they're going to do what they did with Japan. The way the U.S. drew Japan into World War II was to strangle them economically from afar, and that's what they're going to try to do, and then hopefully force China to make a move that allows them to, I guess, be the basis for saying we're now at war with China. But Jeff sent us some stuff from the U.S. Navy, basically predicting that we will be at war with China by 1926 or 2026, 2027. Those do fit with the timescales I've heard about. Basically, I'd always heard 228, 229, 230. The U.S. was planning and being at war with those countries, with China.
So again, so you're saying, right, that there will be an intensification of what's happening, right? New fronts are going to open.
Yeah.
But the end game, what solves this battle is nuclear, capacity to destroy first and survive that destruction.
Yep.
So do you think there is potential for that scenario, the end game, to accelerate to, say, next week, a month from now?
Potential, of course. But honestly, I would just say this. I have lived my life as if me and Brandy, will have some. I'm living as if me and Brandy will have up until 2030 to be comfortable, if you will. Not comfortable, but like to feel like that might be the breathing space, because I feel like I can't go beyond that. That's my opinion, and that's the time frame I think about, which is not that long from now, but that's how I'm thinking about it, at least. But yes, somebody could make, like you said, because of how explosive this is, somebody could make some kind of error or calculation error and think that they have to do something. But uh, you know, I I still also think the U.S. is going to need to get something to happen that allows it to mobilize its own population. So some event's going to have to happen. Some Pearl Harbor event, some 9/11 event is going to have to happen that can allow the U.S. to go onto war footing in its own economy, and it's struggling to get there. I sent you a Rand article talking about how we have to get there, but to get the population to politically agree to that, um, something's going to have to be done. Something's going to have to get destroyed. That is precious to the United States or to the West, to make this happen. So there is an event waiting ahead of us like that. That's what I believe.
I agree with you. I mean, I at least the way I see it, is the support for the shit that's happening is very not out there. Like, uh, there's a lot of shit happening economically here that have people, focus on that too. And yes, I agree with you that some sort of event will have to happen. And I think false flags, the events, and because again, there is no. It looks bad for the U.S. Like, it is bad. Like you mentioned, militarily, we've mentioned the industrial capacity is not there, but not for Europe. Their militaries are fucking not there at all. They're shit. Um, the U.S. That is why I'm wondering, um, about this whole question of more people, these events, because I based it on that analysis that the U.S. just doesn't have the logistical strength, doesn't have the industrial capacity to sustain any sort of like invasion or foreign venture. Obviously, they have proxies to engage in this. It's not, but that's why I worry that the time frame is a lot shorter than we think, because uh, you know I guess they can mobilize people if there is a false flag, or some sort of event, right? Like, but again, you couldn't. I don't know. Those are some of the questions that I have, and so that's why I put a lot of weight on this throwing shit from afar, as being a more a scenario that could happen a lot sooner. And I don't have a sense. That's what I ask you. Like, I don't.
Yeah.
I do think there is going to be a lot more death, a lot of more people from other nations' lives thrown into the meat grinder in the process. Um, but yeah, so I see that scenario where, because again, the U.S. is I don't think it's capable of going to punch, like, for example, the Russians on the face. They couldn't, at this moment. And it would take years to, mobilize. And even then, like, Russians are getting stronger, the Chinese are getting stronger. And so just some thoughts in my head.
Yeah. I don't have an answer. Obviously, I don't know really what the time frame is for when some really bad shit could go on where that ends the world in the way that Scott Ritter's worried about, and I worry about too. I just think that I will describe the time frame as short, in my opinion, as less than a decade, and that what it means to me is that I think people have to stop thinking about these elections. I mean, they have to start thinking about how are they organizing their own life, how are they organizing things around them to be independent of our rulers who are going to kill us and who are going to make the planet largely uninhabitable for us, for humans. And likely, if they have a plan, only habitable for them in some bunker way down below for some period of time. So that's the imperative: is we are way behind in terms of the U.S. working class, and I would say the global working class in the process of self-organization. And so for me, that is the imperative. I don't know when this thing's gonna go bad. I think it's going to be in a fairly shortish time frame, not in a week, but like I said, in less than a decade. And we have between now and then to get our act together and to make an actual January 6th happen. Like, not the bullshit thing that was like theater just so that the state could crack down on you, but an actual mobilization of the people that takes the power out of the hands of our rulers and puts the power back in our hands. That is the only way this ends, in a way, in my opinion, that is the only way this ends in a way that doesn't lead to largely what people might describe as the end of humanity, even though I do think some humans will survive. But that is the only way we avoid this. We had another episode saying is World War III inevitable or just possible or something like that? And it's proving to be inevitable. And that, if anybody takes away anything from this episode, I would say it's to stop thinking of these things as regional wars. It is to start thinking of them as parts of a global war, and specifically as part of World War III.
Yeah, just a matter of how intense and how fast, right?
Yeah.
I agree with you. And but so you're talking about organizing your life, uh, r- right? In terms of this, is that separate than like revolution? Like,
No, to me, those are preconditions for the possibility of revolution, is people independently organizing and coming up with their own set of politics that they organize their life around. As you might, I don't know if you heard me and Hema's episode on the problems of lesser evilism, but one of the worst aspects of lesser evilism is it induces people to orient their politics around the politics of our rulers. And we have to cut ourselves off from that. We have to then say, what do we want? What do we believe in? And you and I believe in things like open borders and things that other workers may not agree with. At this point, not that I don't care, but at one level, I don't care. Just workers starting to speak for their own demands. If workers want borders, then I'm one of those people who's gonna be like, "Hey, we're doing the wrong thing here." And I actually think we won't be able to win if we call on borders. But regardless, what we need are workers to develop their own set of politics around their own set of organizing that is completely independent of Democrats, Republicans, Green Party, building your own thing. And that's going to start very small. So it might start in your neighborhood, it might start at your workplace, but it needs to start now and around you. And people need to begin to develop the muscles and the understanding of what it takes to organize with other people. I would say democratically, like in a way that has all voices get heard. And then when a decision gets made, people are able to, oh, that didn't go quite my way, but I'm cool with it because I agree with what we're doing. I would call that something like democracy. And how are we going to make decisions truly in a way that empowers and hears all people? So we have to figure out how to do that, and we have no idea because we haven't even gotten together. And our only models for it our only models for democracy are dictatorship and tyranny. And we've been living and these are not just things that have happened in 2020 and COVID. We have lived our life in dictatorship, the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. We just didn't know it. We didn't know that this velvet glove had a metal hand underneath the whole time. But there's a metal hand the whole time. We were born into it. Our parents were born into it. All of these people have been living under dictatorship. And we have to learn what actual liberation is. And we're going to have to build that experience on our own.
yeah, yeah, that's the. I agree, and at the same time, is daunting. In the sense of because there is always I see acts of defiance and resistance, but they get captured. And like the dock workers, you see, they're walking out of their jobs, but it'd be different, right, if they were doing it to stop the weapons supplying, these in in again, I'm not very hopeful, unfortunately, in terms of that possibility. Like we still blame the wrong people, and but at the same time, my job is to just say my truth, right, and be as honest as I can, and hopefully people will take on to that, and they see, maybe they'll agree and see the question things differently, and that's all. For now, that's all I can do.
I would say, honestly, I'm going to actually say that this is a conversation you're going to want to start to have with Christophe, and maybe you already have it, but I think that's where these conversations start. I'm thinking of, so I'll give this example. 2 or 3 nights ago, I got up early, like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I heard pop, 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 and I'm like, in our neighborhood, there are people who do fireworks, but it sounded like gunshots. And then the next morning, Brandy, who's on next door. Do you know what next door is? It's that neighborhood online
Yeah.
thing. People were like, oh, people were saying shots were fired. Did people hear that? Was anybody hurt? Da 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 da. And it seemed like no one was hurt, at least that we knew of. And it was clearly that it was gunshots in the neighborhood. And the people were saying on there, like, oh, we gotta. Does anybody have any Ring cameras that they have so they can show it and they can get it and they can send it to the police and find these people and da 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 da. And Brandy was like, I wasn't reading this. Brandy was reading it, but she was like, man, I just don't agree with this. Like these Ring cameras is like, this doesn't seem like the way to go. And I agree with her. And so we thought, well, maybe we'll say something, like, let's write something to next door. And we wrote something. She ended up writing something back that was basically like, in this world of surveillance, like, I don't think sending Ring camera data to the police is the way to go here. The corporations are just collecting our data. They're sending that same data to the state. She said it better than that, but that was what she said. And she goes, like, I don't think this is the way to do this. And we talked about it, and we weren't really sure how people would respond. And there was an overall good response. But at one point, we realized people are going to say, well, if we're not doing cameras, what's your idea? And then we talked, me and Brandy said, like, if people ask us that question out of this, then we're going to propose that we should let's have a neighborhood meeting about how we keep ourselves safe. Let's do this, and let's meet about what real safety would be, in our own minds. And for us, we weren't doing that by accident. We were doing this because we are looking for possibilities when things come up to find neighbors who might want to do something like that. And that was also the reason why we sent out the message of like, let's not collect data. Let's not do that, because we weren't sure if there might have been somebody out next door who's in our neighborhood who's like, yeah, thank you for writing that. So I do think people need to begin to develop a posture of looking for opportunities to organize. And I don't think I could do it on my own. My wife and I talk about this kind of stuff, like talk about how do we organize from below. She's in a group called ACOR, whose way of fighting for things the thing they're fighting for in terms of trying to get the board to do the right things and stop being so fucking tyrannical. I don't really think that's going to work, like in terms of their way of doing it. But the approach they're taking is very grassroots, is very much like bottom up. And I completely agree with that. So I'm like, Brandy can be in her area doing grassroots organizing. I'm trying to find my area of doing grassroots stuff. I don't care what your actual aim is, as long as what you're trying to do is build your own politics around what you and the people around you want to do. And I think having a partner like that has made it possible for both of us to try to look for opportunities to see where we can organize our neighbors, and for me to organize parents, for potentially organize colleagues at work. That's way off in the distance, in my opinion, but at least that happened at Aram. And so it's not magical. It is more like people looking for opportunities to find ways to pull people together and talk about the question, what do we want our world to look like, and how are we going to make it look that way?
I agree with that, and I get it, and and this is our reality. Cristal and I, we were both very intense community organizers. We that spoke our own truths, even if we were wrong at times. And right now we're burnt out.
Yep.
And we have something else in our hands, that needs a future, and it's not disconnected from this.
Yes.
But that's where we're at, and I don't want to speak for her, but I know that at least that's my sense, that we're burnt out, we're a bit disillusioned, that, to be honest, because and I guess maybe it was, we tried to do this in the wrong place. Fucking San Francisco, this liberal fucking place that was committed to surveillance, that all the shit that we're fighting. and we find ourselves in a different place, which is somewhat the opposite.
Yep.
But where people are fucking buried to their heads by work.
Yeah.
And trying to make it, and so I agree with you. Like, that's the shit that needs to happen. And you're gonna have to dig deep, and pay a cost, right, to enact that vision and that reality, right? It takes effort, it takes energy, and at least from us, and this is where I've talked to you straight up. Like, I'm not at a point where I'm gonna start shit anymore.
Yeah.
And if I see something that's real and like, or that it has enough there, I'll do it.
Yep.
But realistically, at the moment, I'm not personally there.
Yep.
Because I have these conversations at work, but you're at a place that doesn't have a fucking union, even though as corrupt as unions are, and everyone's getting beaten down, and everyone gets overworked, but no one wants to do shit about it. And I'm not gonna be the fucking person. So I find my spot. That's my reality, And I used to talk shit about people like me before, where I'm
Yep.
at right now.
Yeah.
But that's the fucking reality of life and things. And even though I understand what we just talked about, this fucking World War III happening now, the potential of massive destruction, and I want to do something about it. And it's just, again, this, I feel like I represent a lot of people.
Yep.
And I get it. Like, you can cry all about it, but you
Yep.
still have to do something about it. And I know that.
Yep.
And so that's why I say, like, that's part of what you and Brandy were doing in that group chat, speaking your truth, right? And like, see if someone else, like, there is a lifeline, like, that will lead you to someone else in a group together, right? But again, this is why I'm honestly a bit disillusioned because of the shit that I've gone through.
Yep.
And I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just, this is real. This happens. This will happen along the way where you will be disillusioned. You're gonna have to gather your shit again, And I will, because like, to me, this is not a posture. This is not a like a hobby. Like, this is essential. Like, that's why I stay connected by coming here. But I know that it has to become action at some point.
Correct. And for me, as I listen, I know that both Brandy and I, as disillusioned as we are not in that place right now. I think we both are in this place of, like, we're still looking to turn some rocks over to, like, do that. And you and Cristal are not in the place of turning rocks over. You're in the place of being parents and taking care of Sierra Mata and trying to sustain in terms of your job. And for whatever reason, maybe because of your experience in San Francisco, whatever posture I'm in is not exactly the same posture you're in. All I can say is I'm fine with that. Like, I think people just have to be real with themselves, and I think if the opportunity comes up, it will happen. It will either be because of you or it'll be because of somebody near you, and then something will start. But you are going to have to feel like you want to do it. It can't be, I should do it. If you try to do this with using the word should, you're toast. It won't work. And people have to just be real with themselves. And I got no problem people who are not in the place, who are only right now in the place of shoulding themselves, knowing that then I'm just going to, like, I'm not doing anything until it becomes something other than should, until I can feel some motivation inside of me that feels like genuinely I want to do this. Because that's my feeling, at least. I think I used to be more like, if you had said that to me 5 or 6 years ago, I would have said, hey, Kenny, let's talk offline, tried to make an argument, a long-term discussion to try to, like, reorient you, like, to trying to be da-da-da-da. No, I'm not. I don't do that anymore. That didn't work then. It doesn't work now. You know what you need to do, if in a sense, when you will need to do it, and you will do it when the time is right. That's what I would say.
And I agree, and I just hope that that timing aligns for a lot of people, and and at the same time, being a parent doesn't mean that I'm not fighting. We're dodging bullets everywhere for our kid.
Yeah.
You know, like all the fucking things that are meant to harm our kid. You know, to capture our kid. You know, plug it into this fucking system. We're battling that every fucking day, and most people don't understand. More people in our lives don't understand. And maybe that's where we're gonna, you know. But I don't know. The point is that right now, I'm not the one starting shit. You know, right now, but I'm still fighting. We're in the battle very much, deep in it. You know, in a very fundamental way, because we're creating the fundaments for someone who we hope will have a life later on.
And I believe what's left acts as like a life raft for all of us, so that we can kind of keep our powder dry and just keep our heads on straight, despite the fact that, what active or not, we know what we're looking for. Because I do believe what's left has helped me sustain myself through a period of activity and inactivity.
Yeah, that's what what's left is for me. That's why, even though I'm tired and made it today, and I'm glad we had this conversation, and I'm glad we're ending with this.
Yeah.
This is, again, we can talk about the theory of shit that's happening, but it's about where we are at, in, like, you know, in yeah. Sorry.
Well,
But
I'm glad you decided to do it today. I know you are dealing with work. I'm just grateful to have you here on What's Left. I love you, and I'm just glad we were able to do this today.
yeah, I'm glad to.
All right, let's call it a day then. That does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes wherever you found this episode, or on our blog, what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find the link to our blog in the episode notes. If you want to reach out to us about ideas for future episodes, feel free to use that link to contact us at What's Left directly. I remind people, if you like anything you've heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our 7 platforms on Spotify, iTunes, BitChute, Odyssey, Rumble, YouTube, or Telegram. And if you'd like to give us feedback about something you heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. So again, Kenny, thank you very much for today. In the future, Eduardo or Hema, hopefully Alex will be back sometime. And I know, Kenny, you're trying to work your schedule out as well. So it's going to be a grab bag of people for these coming weeks, folks. But bear with us as we try to get people to kind of figure out their schedules. But it was great to do this with you today. And anyway, thank you, folks, for listening, and we'll see you next week.